All right, here we go. We are recording. We are rocking and rolling. We're also live. So if you hear me randomly talk to someone that you can't see in the recording, it's because we've got a live studio audience. Say hi, audience. It's just too bad you can't laugh when I say something funny. All the same, hi and welcome. Cheshire Impact's webinar on marketing ROI. It helps you launch campaigns, companies, and careers into amazing results. And right now, as we're in the mix of this coronavirus and just things being what they are, it is ever so more important for marketing to get their ROI figured out, because you're going to be on the chopping block unless you can demonstrate that you are making a difference. So that's why we're here to talk about how you can use Pardot, use Salesforce to really indicate and show not only what's working, what's not working, but then communicate that to everyone else so they're aware that you're actually helping the company, keep the lights on. You are helping sales, marketing and sales doing what they need to do to get those deals in these crazy times. So very excited to get going here. If you happen to have catch this webinar before, this is actually a newly revised version, Falcon 2 of this webinar, because we've added in a lot of topics related to connected campaigns and campaign influence, even though that's more of a future state thing that you probably want to prioritize later on down the path. We're going to talk about it in here because it's one of those topics that people bring up when we talk about ROI with marketing. So let's get into it. If you haven't met me, my name is Casey Cheshire. I am a marketing astronaut and scientist here today. There I am in my space suit. Hey, hit me up on Twitter, Casey Chesh. Just 3 numbers to introduce you to me by 11, number of years I've been working with Pardot. 2,500, number of Pardot implementations Cheshire Impact has done. That's not even considering all the projects we've done. Again, it's not to brag, it's just to show you that there's a lot of different experiences going on, and if we can share some of the lessons learned from those experiences, that's the goal here today. No fluff, no sales pitch. You'll see Cheshire Impact, more on us later. There's one slide telling you if you don't already know what we do for services, here they are. That's not what we're here for today, though. We're here to learn and talk ROI. Finally, 19,000. Anyone know what that is? 19,308. Go ahead and throw it in the Zoom webinar chat if you know what that number is. You're gonna have to be quick today. We can't just steal any guesses what that is. Maybe it's the number of beers. Okay, beers drank over the past 11 years. That's the kind of webinar this is going to be today. I like it. Thank you for setting that tone. That's a lot of beer. I'm not sure if I did the math. I'll do the math later on that. It's actually the number of feet. That is the number of feet in Mount Kilimanjaro, which I was supposed to be climbing this year in July, but we don't know how that's going to work out. So maybe we push that out a little bit. But that's my next big goal, is climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. So if you want to talk Pardot, talk about mountains, I'm here for you. Number of companies using Pardot, that's actually a really good guess. That might actually be accurate too, I'm not sure. All right, today's mission plan, our agenda for today, T-10. We're gonna start with a question. The question is really the goal in mind, right? We're gonna start with, what are we trying to accomplish with ROI tracking, especially first touch ROI tracking. I know there's a lot of confusion around first touch, middle touch, last touch. What do we look at? This webinar is gonna be very clear and specific on the fact that first touch is where you start. And we're going to put a lot of time in the beginning of this whole discussion around first touch. You need to get first touch first. We then, though, transition to later on talking connected campaigns. If you have set up connected campaigns or not, it's something that is the topic now. It is happening. It's a big change in how you do Pardot in Salesforce. Go ahead and throw it in the webinar chat. Have you set up connected campaigns? Have you not? Have you heard of it? Where are you at with that process? Are you actively tagging or not? That's going to be coming up. We're going to talk about it because you need to understand how it fits into your overall plan. Really, we're just trying to figure out where marketing's getting their leads from. So we'll talk through that. Finally, we're going to talk about multi-touch, where it fits in. There's sometimes a huge race to get to multi-touch, but at the same time, you can hit first touch really quick, really straightforward, and ideally get some wins in the door fast, because we need to get some results. And so we're going to start with first touch, but then we can't help but get into where multi-touch fits in. I actually want to share with you some previews on the Connected Campaigns webinar we have a whole separate webinar on it, right? But I wanted to bring in a preview, as well as talking through campaign influence. Campaign influence is a big deal, but it also ties more into the multi-touch than the first touch. But I want you to know more about that. Finally, ending off with some resources. There's actually a lot of resources here. So if you do anything, if you're listening to recording, and I get boring, just skip to the resource section because there's 1,000 different things there for you, especially in a different style. So if you prefer to read, there's blog posts. If you prefer to listen, there's podcasts. If you prefer to, I don't know, sandstone, I don't know. There's all sorts of different medium and ways of getting this information. So it's there for you. And finally, Q&A is at the end. We will do questions throughout. So if you hear me randomly answer a question, I will try to read it so everyone knows in the recording. But I'm happy to answer questions. So for anyone listening, you don't have to wait till the end because you know what? You may forget. Just go ahead and ask your question. If I can get to it right away, I will. Otherwise, I may just hold it to the Q&A. Either way, get it in there so we don't miss it. Okay. Let's talk about the question we're trying to answer here with this webinar. And to do that, let's look at this picture right here. This is an actual schematic from when NASA was going to the moon, right? When they had the moon, the lunar mission, heading over there with rockets, the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong, that whole thing. They had a 1,000-page checklist, thousands page typed out. They had a checklist, very much for checklist people. I'm kind of more of a picture person, and I was surprised to see, lo and behold, not only did they have just a written checklist, kind of like directions, if you're asking for directions to get to a place, but I prefer the maps, right? They actually had this map written out. And it's really important because they were indicating at certain points in this mission, step 67, 68, right? If you're going to launch or if you're going to land your lunar module, you don't want to do a step out of order, right? There's an order to the chaos. There's a lot of things going on here, but you don't fire the engines until it's the right time. If you do, you may not get back for the moon, or if you do, you may not get to the moon, or you may get lost. There's a certain time and place for everything. And I love the fact that they were organized with it. Well, guess what? Marketing automation has a certain time and place for everything too. And I think a lot of times when we're confused and when we struggle with like, what do I do next? Or we just kind of like go for the next shiny feature, that's where we can get in trouble. And specifically in things like we're talking about today, you might say, I want to get campaign influence and I want to get multi-touch tracking set up right now. But maybe you don't have first touch ROI. And that could be a mistake. Or wanting to get multi-touch set up when you don't have touches to track, right? The whole point of multi-touch tracking is to track when you have multiple ways of engaging your customer. But if you're not doing that, then it's not really going to show anything in the reporting. The dashboards will be beautiful and empty at the same time. So there's a certain step and phase of things you need to do for Pardot. And one of the things we did is we created a roadmap. It's called the CSI, Cheshire Success Index. Obviously, CSI is way too good of an acronym to pass up. And but the CSI, the long and the short of it is it's a roadmap. There's 10 steps. There's 10 things you should be doing with Pardot. Marketing automation, if you're joining us with another tool, these steps will work for you too. But these are 10 different features and strategies that relate to what you need to be doing first, second, third, fourth, fifth in Pardot. And it's a snowball. The things you do early on make it much easier to do stuff later on. Things like understanding your buyer better, getting some personas built out, or fixing your data early makes it so when it comes time to do some nurturing later on, easy peasy, you've got things where they should be. Now you go ahead and just drop some content in. And you know what content you should do because you did some steps early on. So we made this roadmap. It's fantastic. I'll show you a picture of it in a second. But really, it's also an assessment. So one of the things that can happen, by the way, while I'm describing this, has anyone actually done a CSI? If so, go ahead and say, I did a CSI in the webinar chat, or tell us what your score was. You can even just tell me privately. You can tell everyone. Tell us what your score was and if you've done a CSI. Because what this process is yes, there's a roadmap, but it's also a conversation. So how this works, and it may sound kind of like pitchy and silly, but it's free, but I just really want you to do this. So what it is, we get on a call for like 25 minutes, and I ask you these series of questions like, okay, are you doing this? And then there's some sub-questions to that. And at the end of it, we decide together whether you want to be a full 1 point on that element, a 0 because you're not doing it. 1 means I'm totally doing everything we just described. Cool, you got that nailed. 0's I'm not doing any of that if I want to. And then 0.5 is like I'm doing some, but I could totally improve. And it's like a bookmark to come back to it. So we go through this thing together. Again, about 25 minutes later, you have a number between 0 and 10 of how well you're using Pardot. I think some of the problems, like when I was using, Pardot and I was just sort of all by myself, I had this gut feeling that I maybe wasn't using it fully to its max. And that kind of stinks, right? You're not really sure if you're using it well. Well, at the end of this, you'll know where you're at with a number, not a feeling, like an actual number. You may be a 2 out of 10. You could be an 8 out of 10. I don't know, but we do this assessment to find out where you're at. And then from there, you know a couple things. First of all, you know where you're at. It is a number, which is actually really comforting. I've had people that are like, oh my gosh, I'm a 1. I kind of knew that all along, but that's cool because at least I know I'm there. And the cool thing is if you become a 2, you've literally doubled your use of marketing automation, right? So the second thing you'll know is your next step. Because it's a roadmap, every step comes before the other. And your lowest number that's incomplete, the lowest one that has a 0 or 0.5, that's where you start. So if you're like, Casey, there's all sorts of things I can do with Pardot. Where do I start? What's your lowest number on the CSI? Where's the lowest number that's incomplete? That's where you go. Fix that first because it'll pay off for you later on. Finally, you know what a 10 looks like. And it's really exciting to know what a 10 looks like. So this particular webinar relates to CSI number 2. I think we have a chart at the end. At the end, there's a chart that shows you all 10 steps. And of course, you can see that when we do the CSI together. But this particular webinar is all about nailing CSI number 2. And every element has a question in this roadmap. And the question here for today is, do you know where your revenue driving leads come from? And I'm going to ask that question out to you, so those in the webinar chat. Do you know where your revenue driving leads come from? Yes, no, kind of, not sure. The goal is not only to be able to say yes strongly as an outcome of this webinar, but yeah, to turn those sort ofs, right? Sometimes we're sort ofs, to turn those into yes, or to at least have a good sense for, we just closed some really big deals. We can go look inside the system. Maybe it's not scalable, but at least we can research and find out. Where do they come from? Why? Because we want to go back and get more of them, right? If we close a bunch of deals, it'd be great to know where they came from so we can go get more for sales. That's answering the number one question in marketing, which is what's working, what's not working. And not only what's working, not what's not working, but then if PPC is working, if Google ads are working, let's do more of that. But if you don't know, you're out of luck, right? So the whole goal here is to be able to answer that question in the overall context of the CSI. And by the way, if you haven't done a CSI yet, very cool. I'd love to hop on the phone with you and go through that. It's really cool. All you have to do is shoot me an email, casey@CheshireImpact.com, or just put in the webinar chat or the Q&A. Just say CSI, and then we'll reach out and schedule time to go do that. But it's really cool. And it's free. The whole point is just so you know where you're at and you know where your next step is. So you just type in, there you go. You just type in CSI, and boom, we will reach out. So that's the goal. Okay, so the goal for today is answering this question and making it a yes. I've got some stories I want to share for you around the campaigns, the companies, and your career success. The importance of ROI. The first one is a blog battle. Does anyone here have a blog? I know a lot of us are doing more and more blogging lately, especially because we've got some time on our hands because all this stuff is going on. Do you have a blog? Yes or no? Throw it in the Zoom webinar chat. Oh, great. I see a lot of CSI requests. Awesome. That will be fantastic. I can't wait to see what your score is. And a lot of people actually set goals too. They'll say, you know, I'm a 4, but I want to be a 6 by the end of the quarter or by the end of the year, that kind of thing. So it's really, it's one of those things that kind of gives you a marching order. You figure out where you want to go. Okay, blogs. I see some people saying yes. And I know some people just sending messages to me directly, and that's totally fine. Yes, you got blogs. Okay. Here's the deal. By the way, the more you interact, the better, because then I can kind of customize to you. To pretty much anyone who interacts gets sort of the custom treatment. It's great. So blogs. Cheshire Impact, we love blogs. Love them a lot. And so much so that up until recently, we actually had 2. And now we have like 3 or 4 in different ones because we're going after different buyer personas in our blogs, right? So previously, we had these 2 different blogs. Blog A, blog B, and one was our like golden child. We were investing heavily in it. We were spending a lot of time. We actually paid money for people to write on it. We were promoting the heck out of it, just branding the heck out of it with swag and everything, right? Really investing a lot of time, and we were getting a lot of hits, a lot of visits, like in the 10,000s for, you know, in relative scale, a lot. Right? Another blog for us, much more moderate, like 1,000 hits a month kind of thing, much more chill. And we weren't really investing time in it. It was just the company as a whole, our team internally would write blog posts for it whenever we had the chance, right? So but we had two different styles of articles too. Which blog was better? Like if I were to ask you, you can throw out, what do you think in the Zoom webinar chat? Which blog was better? The one with the 10,000 hits or the one with 1,000 hits? Not really telling you much data, and that's the point, right? Which one was better? If you had to just make a judgment call, if you didn't have ROI tracking set up and you had to make a choice, which one gets more attention? And before this is set up, it's that one that gets all the hits, right? You're getting 10,000. Wow, the brand hits on that one are amazing. That must be your golden child. But guess what? We had Pardot, first touch tracking, campaign tracking on these separate blogs. And what we did is we had a separate tracking code for each blog. You can do that. If you didn't know about that already, the tracking code you have on your website, you can have a different one for a microsite. And even within the same website, like what we do, treasureimpact.com has one tracking code. And our blogs individually can have their own separate tracking code. And for a while I was running this sort of like agency leadership blog. So there's like 3 or 4 different blogs going after different types of people and just going after, you know what I'm talking about, like trying to help different types of people. And so because we had the separate tracking set up, Pardot campaign tracking code separate on each site and blog, we were able to see not just the visitors, which you could see in Google Analytics and any other app. We were able to see what came from it. Now that you can kind of avoid looking at the bottom line if you want, or you can skip right to there. If you just like, eating the Oreo versus dunking it, whatever you want to do. But direct your attention to the top section, blog A, blog B. You wouldn't really know. All you would know is I'm spending a lot of money, relatively, on blog A, and not really spending on B. B's getting blah, and A's getting woohoo, right? And actually, the leads, if you have some basic tracking set up, you would say, well, I'm actually getting a lot of leads from blog A too. So that's your golden child. You're going to just keep investing in that. But what's the problem? Now look at the bottom section. What came of blog A? Basically nothing. Practically nothing. Revenue, it's trickled in over the years. It might be up to 5K now. But if you're spending $2,000 a month on something, for a while it was zero coming back, and maybe a bonus 5K here and there, that's not an ROI. But you can see how if you're just looking at the activity, you may completely miss out on the fact that blog B is actually getting that's actually your golden child. That's actually the thing you should be investing in, not even realizing it, right? And so, but thankfully we had separate tracking codes set up to know what source is driving more organic hits that actually turn into business. That's the second part of the question. That's where ROI tracking really comes into play. And again, you maybe already have this set up, you maybe not, but I want to share these different stories with you so you can either glean a lesson from it or even a technical tip of like, okay, separate tracking codes. Yeah, you can go crazy with tracking codes. We've got separate websites for our podcast, Hardcore Marketing Show, and Pardot Life Hacks, which we'll talk more about later. Those have separate tracking code too. So if you found out about us through one of those podcasts and then eventually came in and signed up for a webinar, we can actually see, not just that you went to the webinar, because then how do we get more of you at the webinar? I don't know. Where did you come from? We know you actually came from the podcast, right? So that's the full picture you're trying to go for. So it's all about getting that full picture. We eventually dropped putting all that investment in A and actually redirected efforts to B to really drum things up. And come to find out, blog B was more of a decision maker buyer persona. Blog A was more of a like an end user persona, or more of just like a self-help type thing. So it was an interesting experiment to run, but if we hadn't set that up, we wouldn't have seen that. All right. Who here has events? Who does events? How many events do you do a year? In a normal year, we'll say no one has events right now. But maybe you're going to start doing virtual events. Has anyone transitioned to doing virtual events? Have you tried doing, moving over to webinars? Have you tried doing a virtual event with multiple speakers? Throw that in the Zoom webinar chat. The story with this one is a client that came to us. I see 8 to 10 physical events a year. And I don't know about you, but I can't wait to get back to that, right? I'm jonesing to get back to an actual event and shake hands and have a happy hour. So if we can ever meet again in the future, I can't wait. Just say, hey, I joined you on that webinar, and we can throw down and catch up. It'll be so fantastic to do that. But in the meantime, we'll be virtual. Either way, events cost money. They take time, they cost money. Not so much if they're virtual, but still takes your time, right? Still takes time and effort, especially if you're trying to get people in those seats. This particular client came to us and they were doing 80 trade shows a year, 80 different events. They weren't hosting them, but they were joining them. And I see my company puts on a large conference and now looking into virtual meetings. Yeah, it's a great point, looking into that virtual training. So when you do these things, you're investing time, resources. This particular company had sales flying out to all 80 different events, staffing the booth. They actually had 2 different booths they were sending around the country at any given time, from event to event to event, because they're just hitting all these places up. And then they were also sponsoring a lot of them. You have to pay for the booth spot in a lot of these places, paying for extra advertising. The list goes on and on and on of how much this stuff costs, right? Food and travel, being at the event, having a whole team there. So it was quite an investment for them. 80 trade shows. I can't even imagine it. Coordinating that, forget about it. Here's the challenge. They had no idea which ones were working. And this is a trap. As you transition to virtual events, you don't want to fall into this trap, right? Hey, they were growing. This company was growing ish, right? It was kind of like mild, very, very light growing, but they were having deals close, but they didn't know where they came from. And so the effect of this was they were essentially hostage to doing every event every year, because God forbid you get one of those events. What's going to happen? What if that's the event where all the deals come from, right? No idea. But that was the fear. And that fear essentially was making them hostage to doing all these events. Crazy, right? Imagine you're hostage. And then every year they might add a new event on there because they heard about it and they want to try it out. But then all you have is sort of hearsay. Oh, sales really like that event. Or they like the happy hour at the event. I have no idea where it's coming from, but something's coming from somewhere. One of the first things we did with them when we started working together was setting up their first touch ROI tracking in Pardot. It's a must. You get that set up. We did that, and we made sure every event was tracked. Every time a prospect came from an event, there was now a process that they were following, a certain agreement that they never got uploaded directly to Salesforce. They were always uploaded to Pardot first, and they were tagged with a source, with a Pardot campaign from that event. The outcome was they found out which events were working and which ones weren't working. Here's a question for you, the interactive portion of this webinar. How many of those 80 events do you think were actually working? When all was said and done, the ROI tracking was working, and they continue to do more and more events. At the end of year plus, all the data is back in. Thankfully, it didn't come all at once. How many of the 80 events, go ahead and throw it in the Zoom webinar chat, how many of those events, and for those listening to the recording, write the number down so you can't change it. Take your guess. How many out of 80 were worth it? Were driving revenue, deals that were closing? Okay, we've got 70, we've got 3. 4 and 5. Man, you people are cynical, and I love it. 3, 4, and 5. I see 10. I see 10, 70. We got all sorts of different numbers. And, if you're listening, I feel like you listening at home, what number did you say, right? Either way, the final answer was 30. 30 events. 30 events actually were driving revenue, which is actually not bad. Great. 30 events were worth it. I don't know if they needed 2 booths for 30 events, but that's still a lot of events. But the flip side was that meant they were doing 50 events. They were completely, and I'm telling you, completely useless. And you could argue brand, but not to 50 events, right? It's not even possible. So they were literally wasting. Can you imagine the booth, the travel, the sponsorship, all that on 50 events, and like big events too that are like pricey? Well, the good news is that all that news didn't come at once. They were able to change after every event that happened. They were able to go positive, negative. Okay, don't do that next year. Yes, do that next year after every event. So it wasn't like they had to wait for a year to get all the data, but thankfully all the data didn't come in because people might have been upset. Either way, the good news is they were able to stop doing those 50 events. Like, peace, we're not coming back next year. Take all the money they saved and double down on those 30 that were working. They're working, it's the right target audience, it's the right people. Cool. They went after them even more. And so they were upping their speaker game at those events, upping their booth size, Super smart. And they had plenty of money to do it too. It wasn't like that, oh God, where do we get the money from to, no, they had plenty of it. And so much extra that they used the rest of it to try out different marketing campaigns. They did some more spending on AdWords. They tried out some content syndication, did a bunch of other things, right? They were finally able to do more, do more with less, right? Because they're just repositioning. And that's one of the important things here is like, you don't necessarily even have to invent more marketing budget. You can do more with what you've got, and that can be magic. And that finally ties into this last story. I know it's story time with Casey. I'm going to show you some screenshots of Pardot in a little bit, if that is what tickles your fancy. But I really think we can learn a lot from stories, and we also we remember a lot from those stories. If you could remember that company with the 80 trade shows and just not be them, then my job here is done. So if you take one thing, just don't be that company. Finally, career. I remember being a marketer, hacking Google Analytics to try to get to, is my marketing working? And really you only had conversions, right? But conversions could be anything. And it could be a mistake. They may not buy ever, if all. It could be just, it was hard because you didn't have the full picture. And one time I remember having a conversation with the CEO of a particular company, and I was really unexperienced. And he said, Casey, how many emails did you send this month? And I said, about 1 million. And he's like, next month, send 1.5 million, right? As if, and this wasn't ASICs. We're not selling running shoes. This is selling like IT software. And it's not like, with all of you on this webinar, if I sent you an extra 500,000 emails, are you going to buy from Cheshire Impact that much? Like, no, like that's not how it works in B2B sales, right? Now, if I can help you that much more, fantastic. But 1.5 million more activities is not going to do it, right? So that's the old mindset, the activity mindset. It's also the mindset you have when you can't show the results. When you can't tie into the results, it's all about how busy are you, right? So at that company, because we weren't tying into results, because I didn't know any better at the time, it was all about how busy are you? Oh, I'm really busy. Oh, we sent 1.5 million this month. Next month, we're going to do 2 million. We're going to just buy a list of bogus emails or whatever. We're going to do 2 million, right? But that's really weak ground to stand on. That's why when you hear, oh, marketing got cut first, it's because it was activity. Well, they're busy, but we can't justify it. No. We need to transition to ROI marketers, right? Revenue marketers. It gets you out of being a cost center. Cost center is just something that costs money, and you never actually make money for the company. You're not an investment, you're a sunk cost, right? So if you're a cost center, it's like, oh man, they're a black hole with our budget, and budgets are tight right now for companies, and they're just a black hole. Well, you don't want to be a black hole. You want to be an investment. You want to be tied in there with sales to help make it happen, and not just a print shop either, not just the support team for sales. You're out in front finding stuff and bringing it back for sales to be able to club it over the head and drag it into the cave, right? We're actually the advanced scouts in the marketing world. So we're really trying to transition. And I got to say that, I appreciate your applause. Thank you. I got to say, when you do this, it's awesome. And so I was able to do this when I got Pardot. That's one of the reasons why I wouldn't stop talking about Pardot, why I love it so much, is because it sucks when you're an activity marketer. Not only that, but you want to feel like you're making a difference for your company, especially at times like this. And you don't really know if you're an activity marketer. You're like, well, I did more. I don't know if that does anything. I did more emails, more campaigns, more people joined the webinar, but that doesn't really tell you anything. But when you can actually transition to showing, okay, you gave me 5K to spend on AdWords. I spent 5K, and based on this report, the leads we got out of that turned into $500,000 in sales. And this has actually happened to me the first time I was using Pardot. I was able to, roughly that number, I was able to take that report, go to the CEO and say, AdWords is working. Now, I also sold like this other thing that we've been doing historically is terrible. We should stop doing that. And they're like, okay, can't argue with that. The data shows that leads that come from that source that we thought were great are terrible. And this other thing, this AdWords things that we've been testing is actually working. And that was only a test. Okay. Immediately the conversation changed, and literally I'm in this office and it was like, that happened with 5K. It was like, yeah. So he's like, okay, do you want 10K? I'll give you 10K right away. Could you do it with 15K? Now suddenly the conversation, instead of being like, okay, marketing, we need to cut your budget, is like, how much can I give you? Now, the other flip side of that question is like, oh God, does it scale? Like how much volume is in that AdWords campaign? But that's a good problem to have. That's a good problem to find out where that ceiling is at. Because prior to that, you may not even know, you might even have a chance in at bat to figure it out. But this literally transitioned for me. And then as a marketer, I went from being the activity person to being an ROI marketer, revenue marketer. And I swear on everything that's holy in Pardot, I went from being a marketing manager to a VP of marketing at a software company in like 3 years, right? Not magic. I'm not special. I just literally showed ROI, right? That was the key part as I was owning up to what we're doing right and wrong, not just the right stuff, but the wrong stuff. This is wrong. We're not going to test that anymore, but we're done with that. We're redirecting the budget over here, taking ownership. So that's what I encourage us to do. That comes from First Touch ROI. You get more budget. And finally, sales takes you out for a sushi lunch. That's how you know if sales is hip with you. If they're like, yeah, we like you, marketing. They're like, Casey, you want to go for lunch? I'm like, me? Is there another Casey in the audience, in the audience, in the office? They're like, yeah, let's go. Thanks for the leads the other day. I'm like, hey, all right. They're like, no, let us pay for you. Let us pay for you. That's what we're going for here. Sales is hip. They're like, you're driving good stuff in. The leadership are hip. They're like, great, here's more budget. And you have to deal with those kind of problems. But now you're not a cost center anymore. You're an investment. Now you're an investment. You're an action the CEO can take to be like, cool, when things are going kind of crazy right now, let's invest in these sources that are proving that money comes from there. So that's the story. All right, enough story time. Let's roll up the sleeves and get technical. Let's get technical. Okay. We've been isolated a long time. What can I say, people? All right. Do you have a campaign? I got to tell you, this is one of the most overused words in marketing, and it's not going to get any better. It really isn't. Because now we have a connected campaign, and things are just they're still wacky. Now they're connected. So here's the deal. Connected campaigns, we're going to talk about in a second. The word campaign, just consider it. Whenever you can be intentional about being a marketer, just consider the word campaign. Well, in the Marine Corps, it's actually the name of a hat. It's a cover. It's a hat. In the instructors in the rifle range use those. They're really cool looking. Drill instructors too. It's very cool stuff, right? You're like, oh, walking around with their Smokey Bear hat on. Okay, yeah, that's not what we're talking about here, but it's still fun to think about. In marketing, we often use the word campaign. I've done this. Probably did this morning actually, to indicate like a joint effort, like a strike force. Like let's do a campaign around banking, around this. Unfortunately, some people are doing campaigns around COVID, which I wrote about on LinkedIn. If you haven't already seen it, don't do that, people. Don't abuse. Don't try to sneak in keywords on something you shouldn't be doing, okay? But it's a campaign. It's an effort. Usually it's multiple pieces to it, right? Let's do a connected campaign, right? So it might involve, we're going to have a webinar, we're going to have a landing page, we're going to have an email campaign related to it. We're going to have an email. See, I even use the word. We're going to have an email that tells people about that webinar and then follows up with them. And then a campaign can mean a lot of things, but just keep that in mind. And guess what? That definition has nothing to do much with Pardot's definition and somewhat more to do with Salesforce's definition. In Pardot, a Pardot campaign, even with connected campaigns, which you may already know about, where it connects Pardot and Salesforce campaigns together, that being said, they still have different definitions. I know, it's crazy. We'll talk about it. In Pardot, a campaign is your first touch. The cool thing, the reason why Pardot is so magical over just using HTML forms is if you spend $50 on a click from an AdWords campaign, and they are that and more, even for Pardot keywords. It's crazy. If you spend $50 on that click, someone comes to your landing page and they're like, that's a great idea. But they get distracted. They get a phone call or whatever, or they click away because we're all like cats looking at lasers on the wall, looks at something else and doesn't fill out your form, or maybe even closes it, but comes back in a week, just Googles it. Because like, oh yeah, that Cheshire thing, I'm going to go back there. Goes back, hits CheshireImpact.com, goes to our contact us page, fills it out. What would normally that get credit for? Normally that would be getting credit for a SEO, organic, maybe even a direct. They just typed in our thing directly, or maybe they searched for Cheshire Impact on Google. SEO gets credit, but should SEO be getting credit? No. PPC needs credit. Otherwise, you'll stop spending money in that thing. You'll stop showing ROI, and you'll stop investing in the source that's actually working. It's terrible, right? So the cool thing with Pardot is they hit that landing page behind the scenes. It's tagging them with a campaign, a Pardot campaign, and it's cookied and it stays with them forever. And the magic with a Pardot campaign is that cookie. You can't cookie 1,000 things on them. You can do some Google Analytics cooking for sure, but all Pardot keeps track of until you become a known prospect in the system with an email address, you filled out a form or you click the link. Until that happens, all they know is your Pardot campaign and probably your IP address. That's it. But your Pardot campaign sticks with you. It's magic. So we don't want to forget about that. Salesforce. Up until recently, campaigns were stupid in Salesforce. No one used them. They're an object, and people might tag people with different things and try different things, but no one actually used them too much. By the way, no one actually used Pardot campaigns correctly much at all either. A lot of times in Pardot campaigns, and you don't have to raise your hand, but we all know who we are. We've used Pardot campaigns to just indicate a general effort of like, oh, landing page, email template, all these different things. But really, a Pardot campaign should be a source. That should be a source, not just a connected campaign, or not just an asset class. It should be a source. On these Salesforce campaigns, it's all about the journey, right? So however we got you, the Salesforce campaigns don't matter how much we got you, because you can have multiple Salesforce campaigns, and you can tag someone with like 10 of them, and you can see, okay, they hit this first, then this, then this, then this. This webinar has its own Salesforce campaign, because we can now look in our system and say, well, we found you over here, introduced to us by Salesforce or however we found you. And then we could say, you did this, you came to our webinar on ROI, and you loved Casey so much, and that all that stuff, that you signed up to become a customer, right? Subliminal messaging. Either way, we can see that in our system, that it was this webinar, this webinar, this webinar that led to you signing on with us. And I will show you behind the scenes in a second. So that's the value of the Salesforce campaigns. Just keep in mind, they all have different terminology. And one of the things one of the rules, consider this as like a best practice. I never use the word campaign unless I put the word in front of it of what I'm talking about, even if it's connected, right? So I might say source campaign, a multi-touch campaign, or an action campaign, or like Pardot campaign, Salesforce campaign. I still want to, or Marine Corps campaign, right? I still want to put the word out there so we don't get confused with each other. All right. So I mentioned a lot of this stuff already because it's so important, right? That magic I had going, becoming a revenue ROI marketer came from First Touch campaign. The crazy thing is that's all you need to do to transition to being a revenue marketer is just getting First Touch down. Multi-touch is much more complicated and it will take a long time. That's why actually in that CSI, that roadmap, multi-touch tracking is actually 10 out of 10. That's the last element on that whole roadmap. CSI number 2 is what we're talking about now. This is like early steps, early things we gotta nail. The reason it's so early is because it's so you can quickly address it. There'll be some dark traffic, some things you will be working to tag for a while, but by and large, you get stuff in from a list, from an event, from wherever, from a partner, you can tag them. And just getting a little more specific about, well, who are we tagging? Everyone that comes in gets a First Touch campaign, gets a source. We need to know their source. And getting really kind of excited about where the source is coming from, that's going to be important. So you only get one in Pardot. You only get one Pardot source campaign, even though they're connected now. They're connected, but you still only get one Pardot source campaign. You can actually tag people. Interesting tidbit. You can tag people with a Pardot campaign with many different ways. First of all, the tracking code. Like I mentioned, those blogs, two different blogs had 2 different tracking codes with their own campaigns associated with them. So you didn't have to fill out a form or anything. You just had to hit that web page, and now you've got that campaign tagged to you. Now you've got the source tagged to you. Other things you can do. URL. You can put a parameter in the URL. So anytime you have an inbound link you control, like a link from a partner, a link from an event, a social link. Anytime you're doing social, you can tag that link, that inbound link, with a parameter that says a particular Pardot source campaign, and it'll carry that forward. So it won't be whatever landing page or whatever tracking code there's on that site, that URL gets precedence. So you can have that touching them. The form can have, like, you could tag people with a Pardot campaign, which becomes connected, that First Touch source campaign in many different ways. Finally, the upload. It's one of the simplest ways that company that had the 80 campaigns, the 80 events, it was very straightforward. There were a few other outlying things to tag, but mostly we just got to process down. So for ever uploading something into Pardot, we know what the source is. And we actually went back in time and did it right. And you can do this. You can go back in time. You can re-upload a person or a list of people and change all their campaigns to what it actually should be. Highly recommend doing that because you start seeing more ROI showing up. Okay, we will talk about connected campaign in a second. One of my favorite reports in Pardot is not this behemoth of a goofy little ink blot chart at the top, but when you go to campaign, you go to reporting, you go to campaigns, you have this, you scroll down, and then you have this. And the Pardot campaign report is it's a completely underrated report. And I know in all the day and age of connected campaigns, B2B marketing analytics, which by the way, we have a whole webinar on all those topics, and it gets super technical and super pretty and interesting. I know we've got all that buzz, but I got to tell you, the simplest report here, this Pardot campaign report, if you're doing the source campaign tagging right, is magic. This is the thing where you're showing, hey, I spent this much money, this happened, let's go ahead and spend more money on that thing. And what's interesting is if you're doing each source correctly and you're tagging them each way correctly, you not only can see how the source is doing, but each one of these columns is like another row in the funnel. It's like you're watching, in this case, the audit campaign Pardot test. That could say AdWords, that could say partner relationship, that could say our blog. You're watching prospects progress through every step in the funnel that were acquired from that particular campaign. The reason this is important is you can see if some sources get people all the way to a sign but then fall flat. You can see if a lot of people, you have a lot of visitors. Like for us, one time we were saying we have a lot of visitors coming to a particular blog, but they're not becoming prospects. We don't know what their names are. So it's like, well, how can we fix that? Well, let's put a special offer out. Let's capture people that come to our blog to get more information, right? So you can look at every single one of these steps and troubleshoot. How can you fix it? How can you adapt it? How can you update it? So I love it. It's so simple. By the way, it's also on the Pardot Cert exam. Things like this, value, revenue, ROI, you need to be aware of what these headers actually are, what they mean. Value is the amount of open opportunities related to leads that came from that particular source. Revenue is the closed one, the actual captured revenue, the money that you've generated for your company from that particular campaign. Now, it's a team effort, so you don't need to try to steal all the limelight, but you sent deals to sales that they closed from that particular source, and that's awesome. Look at that, $106,000 in revenue, 965% ROI. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Now the budget coffers open up, and they're like, "You're our last hope, marketing. Please help us." Right? That's the magic. Okay. First touch. You can only be in one Pardot campaign, and I got to tell you, for this, opportunity contact roles are required for money. Who is doing opportunity contact roles? If you know what those are, if you don't know, we have a whole webinar on that topic, and shoot me a note, casey@CheshireImpact.com, and I will get you the link to that, or we might just even put it in our chat. But contact roles are on the opportunity. Sales needs to be using them. If they're not using them, there's some things you can do. Even at Chesh, we did some things. I'll talk more about that in a second. But I got to tell you, it is a sweet, sweet thing to get this thing set up. ROI. And you know what? It's CSI number 2 because it's not hard. You're tagging everyone you upload. You have all your inbound links have a parameter so you know the campaign is tagged. You're just trying to figure out where people are coming from and then tag them appropriately. Sometimes you can't control where people are coming from and you can't see it, but you can slowly work on getting more and more visibility into it. When you do it, it's magic. Quick question, Vince. Yeah, probably opportunity contact roles. Is there a way to automate that? Yes. What we're doing at Cheshire Impact for contact roles is we have made them required at a certain point in the opportunity. Not at the very beginning because, okay, we're just trying to help sales move things along, but they can't close it. There's a problem. If you close the opportunity, close one, and you don't have a contact role and you go back and later add it, there's a hiccup. You don't get the full visibility in the reporting. You may not get that amount showing up in your ROI reporting, in your B2B marketing analytics. You can't backtrack that. Just like with campaigns, you can't move people around and expect the data to stay the same. You can't do that with your connected campaigns. Same thing with opportunity contact roles. You have to have it happen before the deal closes. So what we did is there's a certain step in the middle for us, which is like negotiation, or like legal. There's a particular step in our sales process, and it's a status field. And when you get to that particular field, it won't let you save it until you add an opportunity contact role. We also, if you're interested, just had a webinar, and we can throw a link in the webinar chat, all about CSI. And we had our team lead, our practice leader, Nick is fantastic. I did a Q&A with him for about an hour and 15 minutes, all about the opportunity object and how to automate a lot. So Vince, to your question, there's a whole webinar on how to automate a lot of things related to the opportunity. And one of the things he brought up is you can actually, he had a different drop down. He created a different lookup field in the opportunity that would allow someone to indicate who the point of contact on that deal was. So that we don't have to go into a separate interface, go to the contact roles, try to navigate all that. All they had to do on just a regular opportunity was to indicate, of course required, who the primary point of contact was, the POC on that opportunity. It's a lookup field. They just put the name in, the contact in, boom, done, save. And then behind the scenes, we automated for one of our clients, we automated to take that information and then stick that into the contact roles. So you can go that far where it's even that much easier for sales, but somebody's got to log something. The other thing to know is on contact roles, and I'm going a little bit on tangent, but that's okay, it's a question, is if you are sending people leads, this is why leads are good in Salesforce. You send a lead to Salesforce. If you convert a lead, there's a convert button. If you hit convert, it'll turn that lead into a contact. It'll create an an account for them and an opportunity for them if you want it to. And if you do that, you say yes, it'll automatically put that particular lead as a contact role in the opportunity. So all we're really worrying about here is people that don't get converted. And usually that happens when you have an existing customer that buys for a second time, which happens all the time with Treasure Impact. But anyways, that's where you have to be watching out for. So we made a quick report that show us all the opportunities that don't have a contact role in them, so we can go nag sales about it. But now that we put that automation in there, we don't have to worry about that. We know that when it gets to a certain stage, before it gets closed, it will have a contact role, and we're good. Good question. Oh, great. We got some links in the webinar chat. Those are recordings. The Salesforce process automation is huge. Totally recommend checking that out. Okay, so as always, we've gotten to almost the top of the hour, and I threw in some additional content on connected campaigns. I want to let you know, I will just go through all this content so the recording has everything, so you don't have to go hunting for all these different things. But there is a separate campaign, right here I am saying that. There is a separate webinar specifically on connected campaigns. There is a separate webinar specifically on what you need to do to prepare for that. And also there's a whole webinar on B2B marketing analytics. So we're going to talk about a lot of that here, but there are separate webinars that are on all those topics. And this is bonus round, right? If you just literally are tagging people properly, whenever they come into your system in Pardot, and you just slowly identify, the best way to do it, you just have a spreadsheet saying, here are all the different sources that we know of, that we can think of. And are we tagging them, yes or no? And do we have a process to make sure they get a Pardot campaign source, yes or no? And if yes, great. If no, adjust it, fix it, and go after it. And then you start having reports like this, and then contact roles too. And then you start seeing this stuff, boom, you're done. Now you've done your whole job, but at least now you can show what's working, what's not working, first touch ROI, okay? That being said, let's talk about this connected campaigns thing, because it's not going away, and we're confused about it, right? What is connected campaigns? You may even have it, may not even know why you have it or what you're doing with it. So let's just talk about it real quick. Connected campaigns, #worth it. There's a lot of magic that happens, and because we've already talked about this, your ROI stuff can happen before that. So it doesn't even matter if you've done connected campaigns for your ROI tracking. That's why it's so early in the CSI, because you need to do it. Get it. That way you don't have to be an activity marketer, okay? All this stuff comes after you've got that done, because you know what? When it comes to justifying the budget and all that, the first touch ROI is a solid way of justifying it. This other stuff gets colorful, but a little murky. So first touch first. Okay, connected campaigns though, that being said, it's worth it. I don't want to just kind of like tease you and inspire you with some of the pictures here of some of the things we're doing internally. And there was one webinar we did about planning your marketing in December. We do it every year now because we found out, holy heck, a lot of people saw that and were like, we're doing business with Chesh. Right? So now you can always expect that there will be a planning your marketing webinar in December. And when you see the email come in, you'll know why. It's because we're doing campaign tracking. And now I will say, I did talk about first touch ROI is so critical and it's for justification purposes. Now, I'm not going to be completely dark on the multi-touch early on, because if you have an ABM approach or you have a known set of accounts, right? We sell to hospitals, Casey, and that's what we do. Now, you still need to meet the people that are at those places. Maybe just buy a list, but still, what got those people's attention in the first place? That's important to know, but the multi-touch comes in more in play when you're talking about an ABM approach and the multi-touch. I still got to say, though, it gets a little murky. So whenever you can do that first touch ROI, showing we did X, we got this to sales, and they converted to this, it's much more simple. That being said, it can be really important for ABM. You see the reasons on there, and even customization, right? You can't customize reporting in Pardot. It is what it is. We say to our kids in school, what does Sesame Street say? They say, you get what you get and you don't get upset, right? That's what you get. But when you start getting this data into Salesforce, you start using things like B2B marketing analytics and connected campaigns. Now you can customize the world. Okay. So just kind of like a preview, preparing for connected campaigns. It's a whole webinar. Okay, the recording is right there. Connected campaigns recording. It's right there in the webinar chat if you want to just get the recording. I just want to give you the tip of the iceberg. There's some things like where to start, campaign hierarchy. There's a whole bunch more in the webinar that we don't have time to get to today, for sure. Okay, one of the first things you want to think about is starting with the end in mind, right? Again, we start every one of the CSI with a question, which is the end in mind. The CSI number 2 is, do you know where your revenue driving leads come from? That's the question we want to answer. First Touch ROI does that. Where do they come from? They come from this source, and they did a good job and they signed, great, done. The multi-touch question is a little different. It says, do you know what actions are influencing in closing deals, right? Multi-touch is a little bit of a different question, but think about where you want to get to, what kind of reports you want to get to as you're setting this thing up. And I'm going to kind of breeze through this to make sure that we can get to all the resources and the questions at the end as well. But again, you can get all this as like a preview in that webinar. Other things, you're going to start creating hierarchy in your campaigns. That's like parent. They call parent campaigns. And guess what? You have parents of parents of parents. I was explaining this to my daughter. She's like, well, who's your family tree? And what's my family tree? And I'm like, you get my family tree and your mom's family tree. I have a different family tree from you because mine's for my dad and for my mom. But like, I was trying to explain this, but this is what campaigns turn into now. We're just getting organized, right? You need to get organized. And here's the deal. Most important takeaway, if you haven't done this already, or if you haven't looked at your campaign hierarchy, it's not retroactive. If you change it later, you will not get all the stats following your campaigns around. So set it up right in the first place, make it scalable. Some examples are down below. Events, Dreamforce, 2019. That's like events, the parent, right? It's the top line parent. Dreamforce is a child under that. And under Dreamforce, you can have a 2019, 2018, right? I would recommend doing it this way. I don't recommend making the year your top parent campaign. A parent is a year is a bad parent campaign. Why? Because you're going to have to recreate everything every year. And the goal is to actually make this more automated, more scalable. And so years should only be children if you have time to track that. You can always get to the information another way too. Webinars, connected campaigns, webinars, this, right? So this webinar has a parent campaign, and you'll see that in a second. Same thing with AdWords. Okay, here's a campaign hierarchy in our Salesforce, right? Pardot Life Hacks. If you haven't heard of that, has anyone listened to that? Go check it out if you love podcasts or if you've never listened to one. If you want tech nerd deep dive that like puts my strategy to shame, check that out. Jennifer does that. It's amazing. But we're tracking different areas there. We're tracking people filling out the form on the website. Go fill out the form on the website. You're going to get tagged with that campaign. If you came in from social on that, we tag that. The website, an email that we see, but at least we know it came from Pardot Life Hacks, right? So parents are really important. Children, if you have time, okay? It's kind of good advice anyways, right? So at least have a good parent setup and then maybe a good child setup. But you don't have to go crazy with children and grandchildren and all that unless you have time. But keep in mind, this whole connected campaigns thing, it all becomes about tagging now. Now you got to go tag everything, okay? So the more children you make, the more things you're going to have to start tagging. So be careful getting too much in the details because remember, first touch ROI, that's what gets you out of being a print shop. This stuff is bonus, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Here's an example. This is the campaign you're in. Congratulations, all of you here, you're in this campaign right now. Congratulations. Now, if you were to go and sign up with us tomorrow, that'd be fantastic. This webinar would get credit in our multi-touch setup. So if you're interested in that, and we'll talk more, we'll even have a webinar on multi-touch tracking. If you see this on your Pardot, if you go to campaigns, not the reports, but the actual Pardot campaigns window, and you see this at the top, this is like the WYSIWYG editor to help you set that up. And I'm not going to go into more detail on setting it up because there's a whole webinar for that. Okay, really important topic, then we'll kind of conclude with some resources. Really important, and if you can't say you need to come back and look at the recording, this is important. Just because they connected Pardot campaigns and Salesforce campaigns doesn't mean they've resolved what a campaign actually is. They still have two different definitions. So just when you thought it was simple, it's actually not. There are two different kinds of campaigns, and you should separate these out as types. Two different campaign types. You should still indicate your first touch campaigns, which are now multi-touch into Salesforce. These are your Pardot campaigns. Where people came from. Where did you meet? Hey, where did you meet your wife or your spouse? Oh, we first met at a theater audition. Great. That's your source. What movie did you go to see? That is an action. So tagging sources, tagging efforts and actions, keeping those campaigns separate, but realizing that they're all going to be jumbled together with connected campaigns. It's on you to mentally and then in type, like obviously have a type of campaign and type of campaign, separate these things out because they get, can you please show the slide before hierarchy campaigns? This one, that one? There you go. We have to keep moving, but definitely check out the recording or Q&A, and I can show you that at the end, okay? So first touch campaign sources, marketing touch. And my opinion, you got to nail first touch. So it's important you label those things and you're tagging people on your first touch tracking. That's hard enough as is, right? Do it, get it out of the way. And then when you have time, start tagging all your marketing efforts. But that means everyone that comes to your webinar now needs a marketing campaign tied to your webinar. Now you got to tag them with that. So now that it kind of compounds all the work you have to do. Keep in mind, in marketing, we're not getting paid for campaign tagging, okay? So we can't make doing analytics our job. We need to be bringing in leads, bringing in business for sales to close. Otherwise, what are we here for? So some tracking, some campaigns, that's good, but keep it moving, right? So more on this later. Just make sure you understand that like the email or the webinar is not a source. The fact that you're all here, the source of you in our database should not be webinar. Because why? Long story short, hey, how do I go find more of you? Yes, you, all of you here in this webinar, how do I go find more of you? Oh, the webinar. The webinar brought them. Well, how did you find out about the webinar, right? You can see the difference. There's the webinar, which is the action that you were interested in. But how do we meet you in the first place? Maybe you found out about it on social. Or maybe you were already in our database, but how do we find out about you in the first place, right? So those two things are really important to separate. Big wall in between these things. Real talk on connected campaign. The cleanup is deceiving. That's the majority of the work is the cleanup for connected campaign. Have some quick questions. We have a lot of repeat customers since we have products and solutions. How do we use first touch for repeat customers, or their first touch wouldn't change in the case of a repeat purchase? Great question. If you've nailed first touch, then it's time to really focus in on those repeat customers. But I will say there's a lot more to it, and obviously webinars on that topic. So if you've nailed first touch, then yes, it's time to start figuring out what are the different campaigns that are driving our customers to sign on again, or at least motivate them to sign on again. It's a very gray area. But as long as you know, hey, these customers have renewed 3 or 4 times, it'd be even more important to know, where do we get customers that sign on for 3 and 4 times, right? Oh, the customer that comes from this source, they only buy once from us. The customer that comes from this partner, they buy 9 times from us. Okay, cool. Let's go get more from there, right? So it's almost like the origin story is the most important. But if you've got that figured out and you've earned the right to not be a cost center, now it's time to start saying, okay, our huge database of customers, what's helping them with this? And campaign influence is going to be your answer for that question. Campaign influence is absolutely going to be the answer. Hierarchy, don't get confused. Everything now gets a campaign, the sources and the efforts. Okay, final thoughts on multi-touch as all. This webinar really, it starts out being all about first touch, but we can't help but talk about multi-touch because it's real. Just remember, like to fast forward, the justification. We get in trouble as marketers if we're like, hey, I have influenced this deal, right? I have influenced this deal with my email. I was talking the other day with a CMO where marketing would always send an email if you, what was the thing that happened? Um, I think your deal was about to renew or your contract was about to be over. They would always send an email or something, and that email always got credit. What was it? Oh, I get it. Uh, it was like a travel website related to business travel, and if there was ever a travel interruption, they would send an email out saying your flights have changed. Like, please, rebook or whatnot, and talk to your advisor. So no one ignores that email, right? I don't want to be missing my flight or whatnot. They had a high click-through rate, but it was operational. But then they tag that with a campaign, and they eventually go on to book, but they're just rebooking. But that particular email got this huge credit to say, look what we did. It can be very dangerous to put your whole reputation and career as a marketer on some of these touches. Like, did it actually work? We emailed someone after the trade show. Was that what did it? Or was it the fact that the Salesforce person talked to them? It's very gray. It's a debate. Multi-touch is a debate, and it's even when it's most pretty, and I'm going to show you some pretty in a second, it's still debatable, right? So that's why first touch is first, because it's black and white. At least I found this person for better, like 99%. This is the first time we've tagged them. We found them at this trade show, and they eventually bought $100,000 from us, okay? That's a story with a beginning and an end, and hopefully they renew and all that, right? But at least you can show that, right? And that's something that people can wrap their heads around. But if you say, this campaign has influenced these deals with this much, when they start asking, well, how did it influence it? And why does it get all that credit? Well, we give equal credit to everything, which means this got credit, that got credit. It can be very challenging. Now, I will say we do have a webinar on this topic, and I know I'm like kind of hating on it, but it is cool too. And we use it here because we want to know, hey, we found you. We did Pardot implementations with all of you. What makes you sign on to work with us further? Like, what was it? Was it a webinar? Was it an email campaign? Was it a talk with your sales team? We want to know that stuff too. And there is some good stuff. Just keep in mind, it's a harder conversation to have. It's not as black and white. So that's why I always say first touch first. Nail that. And then you are free to work on the multi-touch stuff. Just keep in mind, there's a lot more work that comes from tagging on the multi-touch side. And your justification, the spending, no more print shop, no more hostages, that all comes from doing your first touch ROI. And finally, you need touches to track. To do multi-touch tracking, you need lots of touches, not a few. You need a lot to be able to show the aggregate, what's working, what's not working. If you only have 3 or 4 things going on, it's not really going to influence much. Like, there's only 3 or 4 things going on. There's not much to say other than, yes, everything that happened before they bought was everything we do. What are you learning from that? Nothing. So keep in mind, you need a lot of different nurtures happening, a lot of different events and different things happening in marketing for the multi-touch to really pay off, okay? So that's why we put it after all the other elements of the CSI, because in the CSI, there's like, are you doing nurturing? Are you doing content? Are you doing advanced dynamic content? Are you doing all these other bells and whistles, A/B testing? If you're doing all those different things, now multi-touch really is like amazing. So here's a couple quick pictures. Here is the stock photo of campaign performance dashboard. Here's a real screenshot of ours, right? We're looking at different webinars we're doing, CSI campaigns we're doing, sales webinars. We do a lot of webinars. Obviously, we like to teach things. I like to teach things, share what I know. We're doing a lot of different things, and you can see them on there and how they're affecting. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes a little, sometimes trends pop out, but it's all about campaign influence. And we'll talk more about that on future webinars, and we can answer more in Q&A. But just know that campaign influence is a magical creature, but you got to tame it. It's like how to ride a dragon. And it's all about tagging and campaign hierarchy to be able to see the big picture. And really it's directional, right? So one of the things to think about, while the first touch ROI is very much a black and white story, found you here, you eventually bought, right? I don't know what's happened in the middle. We're doing stuff in the middle, but they bought. That's black and white. When you get into the gray area, it's more directional. Well, people tend to go to a webinar and then tend to buy. Great, let's do more webinars. Right? It's more of that. Or, people don't really, all this other stuff we do, we don't really have any tagging to show that that's being effective. Okay, maybe we do less of that in the future, but you're not totally sure with campaign influence, right? It's a matter of planning. Okay, turning on campaign influence. We will do a webinar on this, but if you haven't already done it, there's some steps here, and we have some resources to show to you to enable it. You also need to know if your account even has it, but it's a thing. So don't go here until you've done CSI number 2, and in which case you are welcome to work on CSI number 10 if you've got actions that are happening. Just a reminder, contact roles are important. And turning it on is easy. It's all about the prep work. Okay, that's it. Do we have a B2BMA webinar? Yes, we do. Great question. We do. We have a whole hour on B2BMA. Oh, look at that. There's also a link in the recording. And by the way, those of you listening through to the recording itself, hello. If you go to CheshireImpact.com, you click on resources, you go down to webinars, you'll see all of the recordings for every single, I think it's up to like 20 now, 20 webinars we've done. Go check them out, learn. Each one's like an hour and change. Hey, a lot of resources here. Jennifer Snyder, she does the podcast. She's amazing. Hit her up on Twitter, email her, say hi. Myself as well. My info's there. Casey Chesh on Twitter, Casey at CheshireImpact.com. There's a lot of different resources. And if you're already working with someone at Chesh, ping whoever you're working at Chesh. They are able to bring in the whole team behind the scenes, and we can work with you. There's blogs, right? Blog, it's actually in resources now. And there's an article I want to direct your attention to, which is don't enable connected campaigns until you read this. If you've already done it, just might want to check that to make sure you didn't miss any steps. Podcasts. I love podcasts. I love podcasting. I did 2 yesterday. It was fantastic. Really got into how to do marketing around this coronavirus, how to really justify ourselves in the leadership. Some great conversations. That's a hardcore marketing show. Pardot Life Hacks is what I mentioned earlier about really down and dirty and technical. So you want to get techie, Pardot Life Hacks is all about it. If you want to just kind of sit back, relax, have a beer, and just hear people chatting about marketing and life, that's the hardcore marketing show. I don't know if that sold it, but that's kind of how I feel about it. Finally, get the book. Who has the book? Do you have the book yet? I wrote a book on marketing automation. It has all of the information from all these webinars. So if my voice drives you crazy, you're probably not still on the webinar at this point. But hello to those of you who are. So just note that it's out there. It's got 5 stars. If you've already got it, I love a review. But it's all the strategies, everything I know. If I were to come on site and do a full day on site with you, everything is in there. And it's all based on the CSI. This is CSI number 2. There's a whole chapter on CSI number 2. CSI number 10 on multi-touch tracking. There's a whole chapter on that, including how to do the weighting on the revenue and all that kind of crazy stuff. So it's all in there if you like reading as opposed to song and dance. And it is funny as heck. This is the CSI. I mentioned it earlier. If you haven't already said it in the Zoom webinar chat, just type CSI and we'll reach out and schedule a time to talk. This is a great time to find out where you're at with Pardot. This is not a sales call. This is a call to find out where you're at with Pardot and give you a sense for what your next step is. Again, where you're at, what your next step is, and what a 10 looks like. But these are the different steps. All you got to do is say CSI in the Q&A or in the Zoom webinar chat, and we will help you figure out what your score is. All right, finally, Cheshire Impact. If you haven't met us already, we do Pardot and Salesforce. So, hey, if things are going crazy for you right now in your company, reach out, say hi. I'm happy to be a sounding board for just saying hi. Casey at CheshireImpact.com. I'm here for you. Now, if we can help you in any way with Pardot or Salesforce, let me know. We are here to help. I know things are crazy out there. And with that, hey, happy First Touch ROI reporting. Let's stop the recording and get to your questions.